joining us for this third orientation meeting for new board members. I don't know if other board members will be joining us. Sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't. Ms. Chung, thank you for joining us. I think this is your second one that you've been with us as well as a student board rep. Let's take a few minutes to introduce everyone so that we know who's in the room, and then we will get started with our presentation. So why don't we start in the top corner. Anne, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Ann Rothaker. I'm the Executive Assistant to the Superintendent and District Office Manager.
Sue, how about you?
Hi everyone, I'm Sue Chevalier. I'm the Director of Pre-K Programs.
Barrett?
Barrett Wilkinson, Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. Good evening, everyone.
Gail? Cressy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Gail Cressy, the Director of Intervention Strategy. Nice to see you all.
And Anita?
Yes, hi, I'm Anita St. Ange. I'm the Director of Portland Adult Education. Liz Love will be joining us in a little bit. She is my Assistant Director.
Carlos?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carlos Gomez. I am the Director of Language Development and part of the academic team.
Jesse?
Hi, everyone. Jesse Robinson, Director of Curriculum Assessment and Instruction.
And the other Jesse?
Hi, I'm Jesse Applegate, Director of Student Support Services.
Great. Kathy?
I'm Kathy Winchenbach, the new Director of Budget and Finance.
And Lindsay?
I'm Lindsay Booth. I'm an Executive Assistant to the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, and I also support the academic team.
Malia?
Hi, everybody. Malia, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning.
And Chris, last but not least.
Chris Reiger, Director of Clinical and Behavioral Supports. Good evening.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for being here. As you can see, we have a mix of folks because today we have three specific sections within the presentation. First, from our academic team, and a significant number of the folks on this call are a part of the academic team, and we're going to start there. And then we're scheduled to hear from Anita and Liz Love, the Assistant Director of Portland Adult Ed, about the work that they're doing at Portland Adult Ed. I think we thought it would be important for the board to also understand that the school district, while it's, the pre-K-12 school district, also provides the adult education in the community, and it's an incredibly robust program serving our community very, very well. So I thought it would be very important for the board to understand that. And then last but not least, you are going to hear from our new Chief Financial Officer, Kathy Winchenbach, and she will talk a little bit about both the department, which is the primary role of this presentation, but we'll also talk a little bit about the budget process. Since all of the board members are new, we thought it would be helpful for you to just get a orientation to what budgeting for schools looks like and what you can expect in the days and weeks and months ahead. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Nally to get us rolling.
Great, thank you. So I think, thank you. Is that you, Anne? Anne's going to get that teed up, and I need to just get my window. Great. So let me just say, and I'm going to try to find Yusuf and Aura. There you are. This is a 50-page slide deck. However, we will not be speaking to all of the details, but what I'm hoping you walk away with, if you can kind of move us forward to the conversation aims, is that you have a general sense of who's on the team, the priorities we are focused on, and I do want to illuminate for you some of what we refer to as standard work. So the stuff that happens that frankly is invisible to most and probably definitely to you all, so you can understand how much work goes on with these very mighty team, the academics group. So that's sort of how we'll go about this. You can go back to it to look at the details if you're interested. So in terms of one other thing I'll say is that many of the team members, most of our directors are here, so just a huge appreciation to you all for coming this evening. We've decided that I'm mostly going to give the voiceover because we feel like that will be a lot more efficient in our time. A few folks might chime in with some illustrative examples, but then I'm hoping we have some space at the end for questions, and then I would definitely invite all of the team to step forward and answer those questions rather than hearing more from me. So as far as the team goes, there are a mix of both district administrators and teacher leaders on the academics team. So the teacher leaders are on the PEA contract, but have full-time release for positions on our team. Some are full, some are part-time. You'll see as we go throughout that the positions on the academics team are a mix of locally funded roles as well as grant-funded roles. So I'll be highlighting that so you understand that of the team that we're going to highlight, many of the positions are not in our operating budget, so we're seeking grant money for them. And then I think this final thing to share is that we talk a lot about this departments of one. So it's, kind of whole departments or functions staffed by a single individual. And I think Javier and I talk about this a lot coming from larger urban districts, that Portland, I think, is unique in that we have a lot of the same context of larger urban districts on a very small budget. And we're striving to move a systems strategy, which requires central capacity and coordination. But we don't have a ton of that capacity on our central team to do it. So moving forward then, Anne, the specific positions on the team. So you've met Sue the other night, and I know she's here tonight. She's our pre-K director. Oh, you can go back, Anne, to the FTE overview. Thank you. So pre-K director, we have curriculum director, Jesse's here, the clinical director, a couple content teacher leaders, Barrett's position, and then Molly is new this year, the academic transitions coordinator. That's through our bar work. So those are positions that since we've launched the Portland Promise, those positions have been largely reallocated from other jobs from that were on the staff in the past, and or were added usually through grant funding to get it launched, though not in every single case. And then on the other side are legacy roles. So these are roles and departments that have existed for a long time in the district. So those are people and departments that are doing work very much aligned with the Portland Promise, but they're functions that existed prior to the Portland Promise. So it just kind of gives you a sense of the team. So the next slide is, oops, there you go. Probably our least attractive photo. Basically everyone. It's a very charming, good-looking team, though this doesn't capture it. But this is just an example of who we are. I asked folks to share with me just a few quick facts about them. So combined, the team has 450 years of experience in education, and combined over 200 years of experience in Portland public schools. And one of the things that I think is super cool about this group is it is a really diverse group from the perspective of our professional backgrounds. So we have people on the team who are in their first year here at Portland, and we have people on the team who have been in Portland working here for 40 years. So really incredible range of perspective in terms of the educators on the team. And then in terms of the kinds of backgrounds people have, most, though not all, have been teachers. We have people who've been principal, professors, published authors, coaches, consultants, curriculum writers, psychotherapists. people who've come from the public health sector, done work with our Make It Happen team, the founder of our race course. Many people on the team have been Teachers of the Year in their school districts, or in the case of Brick, the state. Lots of folks who've had fellowships, nationally board certified teachers, ETEP mentors, list goes on. So it's we refer to ourselves as the A team. And it is just a super incredible group of folks who are both super smart, super good at what they do, and also good, kind people. So moving forward, so in terms of the priority work, we have kind of 4 big areas that we think of as the broad teaching and learning priorities for the district that the team helps coordinate and oversee. So the first one is around core instruction. So this is the goal that we're focusing on as it relates to our achievement and equity goals. And for each of our big priority areas, we have this kind of theory of action that we follow. So in this case, we're looking at this idea that if all students get exposed to relevant, engaging grade level learning with the appropriate supports and scaffolds, they're more likely to master grade level content. And we think of it in the inverse. If they're not exposed to grade level learning because they're pulled out or aside and taught something else, or because the tasks that they're given are not aligned to the grade level standard, they're never going to learn. And so we've been really pushing our focus to look at how are we giving all kids access to core instruction, trying to move away from a habit of looking at kids, sorting them based on ability level, thinking about deficits and sort of teaching them different things or in different ways based on that. And so some of the big areas of focus have been around math pedagogy. I think you're maybe somewhat familiar with that big push, K through 8 and now starting in high school. We've rolled out and implemented a phonics curriculum across the district. We had not had one before. Some schools had one, some schools didn't, and it was all over the place. We're focused on a formative assessment strategy. We've been having conversations about that as a full board since you've been on the board. And then looking at how do we really include all students in the general curriculum, like I just mentioned. And then the other big focus within the core instruction priority is around coherence. So we talk about how, a lot of the times for kind of where we're at in the district is that depending on which school you go to and which teacher you get, you might learn something completely different. Not entirely so, but that's definitely part of what we've observed happening, especially in areas like social studies and science. So we've created what we call vertical content teams, and we're really looking at what is the coherent progression of learning that happens pre-K through 12 in the Portland Public Schools. And when we talk about a Portland promise, what are we promising students and families they'll learn and take away so that they come out of our system both prepared and empowered? So that's the second kind of area of focus in this broad core instruction priority. So just to give you guys a couple like illustrative examples of, so what does that mean, all those education jargon things I just said? So a few things. One, there's across the board in these content visions we're working on, we're looking at trying to facilitate some pedagogical shifts that are in line with our equity mindset. And so as an example, you see on this slide, the little stick figures on the left-hand side, if you're looking at, you see the teacher telling the students and the students listen. So this is this model of, we call it I do, we do, you do, where the teacher is the holder of knowledge. They dispense it into the students as sort of empty vessels, and then students kind of regurgitate that back to the teacher. And so we're shifting that to looking at students bring strengths and knowledge and experiences. And so start by activating that. And then the teacher becomes a facilitator of the learning, building off the strengths and knowledge that students bring to the work. And so Jesse, do you want to give us just a quick kind of example of like, what is that type of work looking like on the ground?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm thinking about an example from 8th grade math, talking about transformations. So in the old model, we might have pre-taught vocabulary and said, okay, reflection is and translation and rotation sort of defined all those for students before we went into the lesson. But now what we do is sort of give students an experience of moving shapes around and have them describe it using their own informal language, such as flipped or slide or turn. And through those discussions where students are sort of needing to use their own language to describe something, they might actually ask for more precise language. So if they're like, I want to turn it this way, like in a circular way, how do you, what's the word for that? Then we might say, rotation in a clockwise direction. And so really sort of honoring the experiences and the language that students are bringing to the work, and then helping them with more precise language as we go forward.
Thanks, Jessie. And that's sort of an example where we're integrating those high leverage principles for English language learners in particular. So really, again, bringing those practices into how we think about creating access to grade level learning for all students, rather than taking kids who are learning English, putting them in a group on the side and teaching them at a lower level, when in fact, many of them are coming with a lot of the conceptual understanding, and we're just helping them find the academic language to express it. And then on the, not quite yet, Anne, on the, I'll cue you, Anne, just so you know. On the, one other quick example here is just the vertical coherence piece of it. We've been talking about building out that curriculum and scope and sequence pre-K through 12. So I'm sure you've heard us talk about the Wabanaki studies as one example. So Jessie, can you just give like an example of a unit that we're working on that really hits at what we're going for here, which is integrating those language standards, as well as an interdisciplinary approach that takes our science, literacy, and in this case, social studies standards together through a really relevant and engaging experience. So this will be happening kind of in a progression throughout a child's experience. So it's not like, oh, you have your 1 month about Wabanaki studies, but rather we're looking at how this builds in terms of the big ideas of critical thinking, as well as the content knowledge throughout a student's academic career. So Jessie, maybe can you speak briefly about one of the units that's been developed that's going to be rolling out next year?
Yeah, so the third grade unit is a really exciting unit, one that, as Malia said, sort of integrates Wabanaki studies, science, and literacy. So students begin with the phenomenon of dams, and they learn what they are and their historical significance in Maine. And then through learning about the damaging effects that dams have had on the Wabanaki people and their food source, as well as the environment, students learn about the environmental justice piece of it, and then how to be water protectors. And that's sort of the name of the unit, is the Water Protector Unit. And so they as in all Wabanaki and science units, there'll be a strong literacy component where they'll be using text sets and have access to complex texts. And then it'll culminate with students raising and releasing salmon into the Presumpscot River. So it's just like, there's a ton of field work that goes along with it. It's very place-based, and there's this sort of like relevant local component to it. So we're really excited about it.
Yeah. Thanks, Jessie. So that just gives you a taste of kind of what we're focused on when it comes to core instruction. And so it's not just the content, but it's the pedagogical moves, it's the integration of the language standards, and it's really about helping all kids access high expectations. So Anne, I'm ready for you to move. So the next big priority focus across the academic team is around our behavioral health continuum. So this is really aligned to our whole student and equity goals. And our theory of action here is really about how if students are explicitly taught how to meet expectations and provided the just right supports to live up to them, and if educators enact the expectations and supports with a trauma-informed, equity-oriented, self-aware and self-regulated stance, then all students are more likely to feel welcome, valued, and to succeed in the school environment. And we'll be able to eliminate discipline disparities by race, class, language, and disability. So that's kind of the big theory behind the work. And our areas of focus around tackling discipline disparity, really the implementation of PBIS, which Chris will speak briefly to in a second, de-escalation training for educators, training and work around how to become trauma-informed. We're working on secondary attendance. This has been a little bit on pause and sort of repurpose this year because of COVID, but that came out of our bar work. The implementation of the Breathe program, the Breathe Continuum, and then really strengthening our social work model across the system. So if you move forward to the next slide, and Chris, can I invite you to just briefly highlight from what I just shared there, the PBIS framework as kind of a key decision-making framework that we're using district-wide around our behavioral health supports.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Malia. I think that to just step back, I think it's what we want to do is take a public health model to this work and think about prevention and early intervention rather than reacting and responding to issues when they come up. But how do we get very explicit about what we expect of students and adults, and how do we teach that? How do we recognize everyone for doing well and responding in consistent and predictable ways to unexpected behavior? And that's not, if this, then that, which is where I think a lot of folks, we often think of like, we want to respond in a very, if this person did this, then that. But how do we respond with a consistent process so that it's equitable, so that we're meeting students where they're at? So we have to put a lot of things in place, and these are the 7 components of what we're trying to do in every school. And then have a really solid response to intervention process to meet the needs of students who need something more, something different.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So obviously there's a ton packed into that, but just wanted to highlight that kind of approach to the work and what we're kind of focusing on there. So then our third big area, priority area, is around pre-K. So you can move to the next slide, Anne. And you all heard our update that Sue gave the other night around where we're at and where we're headed with our public pre-K. But we're really looking to expand seats and reduce barriers while making sure that the program quality is strong and that there is a coherent progression from pre-K into K1 and 2. And so the areas of focus are, like we've just shared, continuing to increase the number of seats we open in the city toward that 5 years, 140 new seats target, reducing barriers in terms of transportation and before and after care, increasing the consistency and quality of the program, and then really integrating the pre-K into the full early childhood development continuum across the district. I don't have a little example slide for this one just because you all got to spend a lot of time with Sue just the other week to hear in much more detail what's going on with our pre-K work. So then if you move to the next slide, our fourth and final big cross-cutting priority is around professional learning culture. And so here our theory is that if we establish shared vision for instruction, deepen our equity literacy, and provide embedded professional development while lifting up teacher leadership and supporting collaboration, we'll have a culture where people trust each other, give feedback, and really grow in ways that serve students. So this is where our work around explicit PD for equity literacy fits, our coaching models, where we're really building a vision for a coach and supporting and coaching our coaches, supporting collaboration and co-teaching by explicit skill building in those areas, and then really working with our leaders around how you build a culture of collective efficacy. And so if you move forward to the next slide, here I was just going to briefly share that. So what all that means is that you see us doing the first top slide is a coach working with a teacher, looking at student work, right? So we're not just kind of talking in theory or whatnot, but sitting down, looking at what are the goals we have for kids, and then using data to really look authentically at our kids learning what we taught. If not, why not? And what do we do? What's our right next step? The bottom right-hand corner is, how we're running PD. that's one of our math coaches working with some math teachers. And I highlighted there that they're doing the math together. So again, we're not just describing the work, but like actually rolling up our sleeves and doing it and imagining what are the kind of misconceptions kids would have and what are the moves you would make. So this really embedded, authentic PD that's ongoing and not just like one and done kind of big PDs. And then the concept of collective efficacy is something we've talked with prior or board members about in the past. And obviously this graph is way too small for you to understand, but the big takeaway is that John Hattie did this meta-analysis on sort of what drives student outcomes the most. And all these things that people talk about and worry about, like poverty or home life or motivation, are way, way less of an impact than this concept of teacher collective efficacy, which is when teachers have a goal for student learning, share what they're trying, share that goal together, and believe that it's within their locus of control to help kids get there, that's like way more powerful than all these other kinds of things that folks talk about and think about as either barriers or strategies that drive outcomes. So that's why, at least for me, I think the culture piece of this is something I'm super obsessed with, because if you have that collective efficacy culture, then you're unstoppable. So that's what that priority area is all about. So moving forward then, and as far as the academic team goes, since the launch of the Portland Promise, what we've been as a system trying to do is really shift away from a group of schools doing their own thing where we talk about pockets of excellence. That's kind of like a joke to us now that there's pockets of excellence in Portland, because there's incredible, amazing things going on in teachers, but it's always described that way. And so we're trying to make this shift to an actual district-wide strategy that's oriented around advancing shared goals in the form of the Portland Promise. And so that's where our team comes in, is the sort of support and coordination of the systems-wide work that's shared across schools. And we move that work through supporting and lifting up teacher leadership, really being deliberate about supporting educators to collaborate productively, and then having that real embedded professional development approach that I mentioned, where we don't just launch a PD and, wish you luck, but, we have professional development, we have coaching, we come back to themes, we have look at practice things and then come back to the data and see if it's working, things like that. So that's kind of the approach after I just described what we're focused on. So then next, Anne, you can, thanks. So this is just a quick overview of the departments, and again, reminding you, a lot of them are departments of one within the teaching and learning continuum. And so for each of these, there's a lot of sort of content on the slide, and I'm really not going to speak to much of it. But what I'm hoping you take away is okay, here's the team, here's who's on it. Here's sort of the scope of work, and then here's what we're investing in that area in terms of our budget. And so in terms of all the scope of work stuff, it's something you could come back to and look at later if you're interested. But I think partly, again, like I mentioned in the frame, I want you guys to just understand that there's a lot of invisible work that happens. And I think a conversation that happens at the board level is, really preserving things that are close to the student, for example, which I agree with, but all of this work has to happen. So if it's not a few people coordinating it centrally, it either isn't happening or it goes to teachers to do and administrators. So the first department is the curriculum and instruction team. So that's Jessie, who you just heard from. And then Brooke Teller is a teacher leader. She's on full-time release, focused on our STEM work. And then Fiona Hopper is part-time, also partially grant funded, and she's working on the social studies and is also the Wabanaki Studies coordinator. And then Carly is a shared math coach across all 3 middle schools, but sits on the academic team as well to kind of create those connections. And then we illuminate here for you all if there's any consultants that we work with, because we think of consultants as an extension of the team. We can't afford, for example, to hire Tracy Zager as a full-time employee, but the way we get this kind of expertise and expand the expertise and really bandwidth of our team sometimes is through these consultants that don't create long-term FTEs on the budget and still kind of help really move the work forward. So we have Tracy, who's working with our math work. Kelly Smith has been in the district for a long time. We've been ramping down her contract for a long time, so it's really small at this point, but she's been working with elementary schools on our literacy model, and then Great Schools Partnership. We have one coach with them. We used to have two, and Kate's working with Portland and Deering High on their instructional vision work. And then here's just sort of the whole range of stuff that happens with the team. And what it kind of amounts to is they're overseeing, tools and support when it comes to curriculum instruction. So curriculum assessment, educational programs, tech programs, a lot of coordinating work. So I mentioned that vertical team concept, and Jesse gave the example of that one unit. So in order to produce that unit, there's somebody who's got to have their attention on pulling together and meeting with Wabanit tribal leaders from across our state. So many hours put into building relationship, building trust, consulting, advising. So there's a whole body of work there. Then there's pulling together teachers across buildings and coaches and administrators. So we're getting kind of diverse perspective, input, and buy-in. Then there's all the coordination of you get all these people to collaborate and give the ideas, and then you have to sort of land it and to synthesize it and put it back out. So all that kind of work that goes into curriculum or assessment design is a whole ton of coordination so that we can do things in a collaborative way, both internally with our educators, but also with the community. The team sort of decision maker on a lot of things when it comes to curriculum and assessment. Lots of work around the planning, around implementation. So we are trying to be really intentional about not just throwing out a tool or an idea, but really seeing through the cycle of learning. People on the team do direct coaching in schools, design and run professional development, manage all of these partners, vendors, consultants, state colleagues, et cetera. So a whole bunch of stuff, but that's kind of the nature of the work on that team. And then as far as the budget goes, the local investment is about $400,000. And so that's for all curriculum materials, books, assessment tools, professional development, coaching of our coaches, things like that. And then we have several grants that the team is pulling in order to, add to our resources in order to do that work that I just described. Just as a quick process note, my thought was just to fly through this and have you take kind of note around your questions and do questions at the end, only because I feel like otherwise we might go down deep on one thing and then not get through the rest. But I guess for Emily or Yusuf, is that okay? Or would you prefer to do more of a pause, ask questions for each department?
I think having questions at the end makes sense because we might get them answered later on. Okay.
Is that okay with other? Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So the next department is the behavioral health team. So we just one person, Chris, Dr. Reiger, and then we do have one very small contract with Sally, who does some case consultation with our middle school counselors, and then we have one PBIS coach for one elementary school that's funded by the state. That's kind of an extension of that PBIS coaching that Chris does with a lot of schools. So very lean and mighty team there. And the next slide just shows some of the work we have going on there. So a few highlights are Chris is really working with schools to coach them around the PBIS work. He coordinates with and oversees kind of the social work department and the strategy there, does a lot of liaising with the mental health partners around the city, thinking about social emotional learning curriculum, and a bunch of other stuff that's reflected there. And then in terms of the budget, a pretty small local investment, so just $17,000 for a few different kind of PD type things. And then we have some grant money invested here. The first piece is around a contract for Blanca to work to help us diversify our pipeline for social workers. and then some federal grant money allocated toward trauma-sensitive schools training and de-escalation training. I didn't mention, but I should also say that Chris oversees McKinney-Vento work and supervises our 0.5 McKinney-Vento coordinator. And if you don't know, McKinney-Vento is students who are experiencing homelessness, and there's a whole set of strategies for supporting kids in that situation. So next is the language development team. So Carlos is here tonight. He's the director. And then we have 3 teacher leaders, 1 person on full-time release, and then the other are working part-time. And so that's the team. And the next slide, I think, Carlos, will you speak just quickly to giving the group a snapshot of our language learner context in Portland?
Sure. So we have approximately 1,500 students who are officially English learners. And although that's a broad term, it does include students who are intensive English language development students that perhaps are recently arrived or in the beginning stages of their English learning journey. And then students who have also working on cognitive academic language skills. So they've been here for 3-4 years, perhaps longer, and are further along. They include students that are, students with limited or interrupted formal education in their home countries and varying levels of literacy in their native language or heritage language. Our English learners also include approximately 260 or so, 258 dual identified students who have special education and are English learners. Our students come from all over the world, and for a small community, we have a very large variety of languages spoken, and we have listed here the top 5 languages. But we are responsible as a district to ensure that these students have equal access and are learning content and English language. And so on the right side of this slide, you'll see the resources that we have dedicated to that language development with the goal of having as many of our students proficient in English and at least one other language. And so we have different resources that we support these students. We also support the teachers, classroom teachers that work with our English learners. And and as an academic team, we also are conscious of how we are responsive to our English learners' needs. And we use, it's a little snapshot of some ratios that we use to distribute some of our resources. And we try to adapt that frequently, certainly annually, and oftentimes in the course of the year, we'll make some adjustments. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of the teaching and learning of our English language learners.
Thanks, Carlos. So then if you move it forward, so if you're thinking about that's the student population we're serving and the teachers we're supporting, this gives you a snapshot of all the work that Carlos and Jane, who are really the 2 kind of full-time folks, and then a little bit of Allison and Anne-Marie's time. This is the stuff that they're coordinating and managing. So again, you can kind of scan, it's a lot of stuff. A big focus is the implementation of the LAU plan. So I won't speak a lot to that because that's coming up at a board meeting soon. Professional development, they do teacher and ed tech, kind of what I call dotted line supervision. So work with principals to do supervision and evaluation of 80 staff members. And they also have just a huge body of technical work, access administration, managing the visiting teacher program, overseeing the whole process for sealed by literacy. It's just all of this work that's a huge, huge lift that they kind of do behind the scenes to coordinate and make those things happen. And then the next slide just gives you a picture of the budget. So the local investment is about $100,000, and that goes toward curriculum assessment materials. and some of the fees for things like visiting teachers, seal of biliteracy, and then a much larger grant investment specifically through Title III, and that goes towards PD, family engagement, and also covers our Summer Language Academy. So the next department is Student Support Services. So Jesse Applegate, the other Jesse, although you're your own Jesse, not just the other one, is here tonight. He's our new Director of Student Support Services as of this year. And then we have two assistant directors. Julie works with and oversees the elementaries, and Aaron works with the secondaries, and they both have a whole bunch of other work streams that fall under them as well. So Jesse, I don't think I actually had told you I'd kick it to you for this. I'm happy to do it, but do you want to just give the super fast snapshot of our special ed population?
Yeah, absolutely. So good to be with everyone tonight. So the number of students we have that we serve in the district is 1,034. You can see that's the range of needs, up to and including students who are placed out of district in specialized special purpose schools due to really significant needs. So, wide range, of course. That being said, we do have about 66%, about 2/3 of students are in what's called a regular class placement, meaning they're in general education for the classroom for 80% or more of the day. And that's something that we're working to increase over time. We have, so most students are in the classroom, the general education classroom to some extent, whether it's 80% of the day or significant amount of the day. We also have district programs, which are special programs in our schools, but they're designed for students with lower incidence disabilities, students with autism, students with intellectual disabilities, and those are overseen directly by the assistant directors. And there's sort of a process for identifying students who for whom that would be a good fit. And this number, I should say, also does include the BREATHE program, although we'll be addressing the BREATHE program, I know, separately. This number of students does include those. So that's, Emily, I think that's kind of a good.
That's perfect.
Overview.
Thanks, Jesse.
Yeah.
So in terms of just staffing, you see the numbers there are just educators across the system. But if you move it forward, and I'll briefly speak to this, and Carlos mentioned this with the ELL staffing. So teachers and ed techs are usually kind of staffed and figured out at the building level, but we coordinate staffing for special ed and language or ELL centrally because of the need to be flexible to the needs. So it's not like this is my teacher forever, but we're really monitoring where the kids, where the needs, and how can we flexibly move resources so we're being efficient with our people and resources. Of course, in many cases, there's a case manager that's at a school for their same school for their whole career, but there's opportunity for us to be strategic in how we move our resources around. And so we started last year using a model where we use a weighted formula and look at the number of students in a school that are not in special programs. We look at the disability category, and there's sort of like a weighted average that kind of increases or decreases how many kids sort of show up in their total based on typically what's required to serve a student with that type of disability. And we look at their SDI minutes on a whole set of things. And that enables us to figure out what's the right teacher and ed tech ratio for a given building so we can allocate resources accordingly. So if you move it to the next slide, that just that's just a partial snapshot of what that might look like. But you can see with East End, the top example, they had 35 students that were in resource, but their total weight when you put in the disability category was 42. So we would then consider staff ratios based on that 42. So this is a model that we learned from a lot of larger urban districts across the country. But just giving you a sense of how we think about staffing for special ed, since it is a huge budget line. And then if you move forward in terms of the work of the team, this department has a huge amount of kind of big priority work and just tons and tons of that kind of invisible behind the scenes details that they hold. So some of that priority work is bolded in terms of really focusing on helping serve students in the least restrictive environment. You saw we're around 65% of students are in full inclusion. We're aiming for 75%. I think, there's both a lot of work streams that they're responsible for, and there's also just a heavy responsibility around compliance in special ed. And in addition to kind of coordinating work, they're doing a lot of direct supervision. So the team directly supervises related service providers. So those are like psychologists or speech therapists, oversee the Chapter 104 staff, like Jesse mentioned, directly supervise and oversee all of our district program staff, do the IEP compliance, sort of oversee both the general but also the big federal grants for special ed. You can move it forward. And basically the story here is the list keeps going. 504 out of district, child find process. There's just a whole slew of stuff that goes on the student support services department. So that gives you, if you want to read later, just a sense of some of the stuff that falls on their plates. And so then in terms of budget, here you see the local investment. So this includes teachers and ed tech. So this is a little bit of a different look at this from the ones we were showing before, which were really more kind of looking at the central budget. So this gives you a broader view of kind of that total amount that includes both local and FTE. That's not just central roles, but also includes our educators in schools. Jesse, anything else I should say about that budget slide?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Great. Well, I guess, Millie, we could just mention that the local entitlement grant here, this federal funding comes from IDEA. So that's a federal, that's federally funded.
And can you just explain what IDEA is really quick?
Oh, yeah. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So the main, piece of federal legislation that drives, everything we do in special education. And as part of that, local districts are given funding based on a formula every year.
Yeah. Great. So then in terms of the Breathe, Breathe is next. So this is the program it is within the student support services umbrella, but we kind of have pulled it out because it's been a big focus and investment for us as a district with the launch of the Portland Promise. So we have Chris McCarthy, who's the director, who sits on the academic team. And if you move it forward, basically the work of this team is to directly run our day treatment program. So this is where students are 100% of the time in a separate setting. The day treatment program used to be in the basement of our central office, but we've moved it into the Lyman Moore School for our K through 8. And they have their own space, their own door, things like that. And then our high school day treatment program is housed at Deering High School. So Chris is the principal of that program. And then there's this continuum of in-school programs and consulting services for kids with significant emotional and behavioral disabilities. And so they oversee that. And the work we've been doing for the past several years is really to have a full continuum of supports that is based on an evidence-based model. We, for example, in elementary didn't have that in-school program before. And so one of the big observations that the team had was that there was a lot of kids in this day treatment setting that didn't need that level of restrictiveness, but because there was nothing else in the building, they put them into day treatment. So this is, again, in the spirit of putting kids in their least restrictive environment. So that's kind of gives you a sense of the work that's happening within that Breathe continuum. And then in terms of their budget, they just have a small amount for in their operating budget, $23,000. And then these are the FTEs that are associated. Again, this now does not just reflect your central office group, but the number of teachers and ed techs that are also allocated for this program and social workers. Next is pre-K. I'll fly through this because, again, you guys got a big update on this just the other night, but Sue's the director, and then we just had an assistant start at a 0.5. This is a position that we initiated when we did the resolution with the board. And so in terms of the work there, Sue gave you, I think, a really good sense of things that are going on. I think if you look back at this slide later, it just gives you that understanding of all this kind of other stuff that's in play to pull off some of the big priority things that we speak to you all about. Everything from, managing the details of the pre-K model to coordinating all of this stuff with our partners across the city, professional development, kind of the whole range of soup to nuts on how we run a citywide pre-K program. And then from a budget perspective, the local investment is about $170,000, and that's about the startup costs for launching new classrooms. This is for contracts with our partners, and it's for curriculum and assessment materials. And then we have a couple grants that Sue's been able to bring in to support some other work we want to do around summer learning. And then she spoke to this new grant that she just received around family engagement in multiple languages. And then there's our intervention kind of ESSA summer team. So Gail Cressy, also a department of one. This kind of highlights, next slide, all of the stuff Gail holds. This is Gail's one of the people I think everyone on the academic team would say, if we didn't have Gail, everything would fall apart. So she really makes sure, sort of has her hands around all things around the teaching continuum. She helps manage, sort of is our strategic resource manager because she oversees our federal grants, but comes to this and consults across our team to make sure we're strategically leveraging local, federal, and other kind of foundation grants. She coordinates and oversees Title I. And so that's not just the budget side, it's really the strategy and the support and working with principals around the strategies and looking at if they're working and getting the intended impact. She oversees summer intervention programs and liaises with a lot of our partners in the city for work that we try to do in collaboration with community-wide partners. And then in terms of the local investment, it's a little over $100,000 for what we put in here is actually, Gail, can you speak to this, just how you kind of cut out the summer on this one? Oh, you're saying that's the next slide, right?
Sure. I mean, what's here is the contribution from the academics budget towards specific programs that are more of a tier 2 intervention, so not in the core instruction. And then that's really the investment in local under the intervention side of things. And then summer's coming up on another slide.
Thanks, Gail. So moving forward, Molly is new this year. She was funded through BAR, and so she's our academic support and transition coordinator. And so she was really, I'll talk later about the COVID response team, but she was hired to oversee the BAR strategy, and I can talk more about that later if you guys want to learn more about that. But she's looking at those transitions, especially the 8th to 9th grade transition, in service of supporting better post-secondary outcomes. So our BAR grant basically showed us that we have an okay graduation rate, but when you look 2 years out, we don't have such great outcomes. I think something like half of our kids persist into their second year of 2 or 4 year college. So we came up with these strategies around additional supports, transitions, et cetera. And so Molly was hired to really help coordinate and implement that work. And she does the summer now, as Gail mentioned. And so reflected in the budget here, Gail, then will you speak to this one?
Sure. Do we want to go to the budget slide or?
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm tracking on mine.
So our local investment for summer programming, the the 4 to 6 weeks in the summer that we offer programs for pre-K to 12 students historically is a little over $100,000, which doesn't quite get us there in terms of either offering what we should be or what we do. And so that's supplemented through grant investments. We had a significant federal grant investment before until we started losing money under the title grants. And so we had to fundraise to make up that gap. So this reflects this past summer, which is this budget year, that we raised almost $75,000 for summer programming to ensure that we could deliver some sort of remote virtual programming for kids who needed it.
Thanks, Gail. And so just 2 more domains left. So the next is diversity, equity, inclusion. Barrett introduced himself earlier, is the director, just a 1-person team. And the work in terms of the DEI work that Barrett holds is really working with our equity leaders cohort, which I think you guys have heard us talk about, especially when we've been doing the race course together. Equity hiring, our policy, consulting and coaching to schools around DEI issues, kind of being the person who's responsive to things as they come up, and also managing lots of grants. If you go to the next slide, at this point, the work that Barrett's position and the work that he oversees is not included in our local budget. So this shows you several of the grants that help fund our diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the district at this point. And so finally is teacher support systems. So Beth and Carol. So Beth oversees teacher induction, mentoring, and certification, and Carol is our professional learning-based salary system coordinator and does deep coaching with teachers who are getting ones on our teacher evaluation system. Just for context, these 2 positions have lived in HR before. I think they were in academics, went to HR, came back. So much like I think Barrett's role too, they straddle HR and academics, but live on the academics team. And so in terms of their work, they oversee and coordinate new teacher induction, mentoring, certification. And then I described kind of that coaching work Carol does. And then our PLBSS system is a part of our contract where as teachers get engage in professional development, they kind of get credit for that. And that's how they move up the salary system. So it's a pretty innovative model in Maine. And so it requires quite a bit of oversight and management for that to work. So she holds all of that. And so as far as the investment there goes, we do stipends for teachers to be mentors. This is part of a statewide requirement. But when teachers are new, they get assigned a mentor, and mentors are paid. So there's a budget for that. Another part of our PLBSS system is that we offer courses that are aligned to district priorities. So you've heard about the race course as an example of that. So there's stipend money that teachers get who design and lead those courses. And then we just have really small amounts that we put into things like materials for orientation and PD. And then the final thing I'll say, and I'm literally to the minute on time, although I know we haven't had any questions yet, but I just wanted to make this final point that the academic team really kind of stepped into what I think of as a COVID response team when we kind of COVID hit last, I guess, late winter, spring. And so Molly, we asked to repurpose into becoming in the spring our crisis team project manager. She later this fall took on community partner coordination. Brooke became the outdoor learning coordinator. Jessie became our founding principal for Remote Academy. And Beth and Carol became the materials distribution coordinators for Remote Academy. And so I think what's cool to see here is that, it's meant a lot of the work we've prioritized has had to slow down. But by having some central capacity, it enabled us to really activate that kind of response and pivot. And I think a really cool way that I know in talking to other districts in Maine, they were really trying to learn from and grab our stuff because they just are really small and didn't have that kind of opportunity. So the team has stepped up and done a lot of heavy lifting around our reopening strategy and our immediate crisis response in the spring. So that was a mouthful and a slide full. But like I said, our goal was to hopefully give you a sense of the big priority work, but also leave you with the impression of the scope of just all of the work that gets managed, coordinated, and led through the academic team. So that's what we have. And we're right at, I think I had us down for 6 to 7, so it's 7:01, but I defer to you, Javier, about if you want to give us a few minutes in case folks want to ask questions.
I definitely think that we should open it up for questions. So.
Great.
Yeah. Ms. Russell-Better, I think you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I was waiting to see if Yusuf had a question too, because I was thinking, but mine's pretty quick, I think. So thank you for all of that. So helpful to get more context and just good reminders about all the behind the scenes work that, I think as school board members, we're getting a sense, but it helps me to know, I think a lot of parents and families have no idea, like all of this work that is being done. So thank you for sharing all the details. I was just wondering, Malia, the slide about mentor, I guess you don't have to go back to it. I was just trying to think of what my question was. I just was trying to, there was a piece about the two positions with Dunn you were explaining about in COVID that they had to kind of be, put to other work. But I know that those were the two positions. And then you also said that teachers can get a stipend for mentoring. So are those two staff people, though, usually a part of their job is, I know you had some details about it and I can't remember.
Yeah, so we have, I think you're talking about Carol and Beth.
Yep.
So Beth, teachers get a small stipend to mentor another teacher, and then Beth coordinates that whole system. So it's like all these, it's figuring out who are all the new teachers, who's in their first year of the profession, who's not new to the district, not new to the profession. There's a whole bunch of sort of policy around then what type of mentor you get, how much PD you get. So she does like figuring out, who needs what, how do we coordinate it, how do we pay them, how do we support them and train them to be effective mentors. So that's the work of the members of this team. But then, the people who get this type of money are teachers in our buildings.
And then are they also like seeking out teachers who might be good mentor? Or like, how does that process?
Yeah, great question. We've actually, that was a priority that got paused for this year. Beth and I have been working on trying to better articulate kind of like the competencies that we'd be looking for in an effective mentor. And for example, part of the big conversation we've been having is looking for mentors who are come with a very strong and clear equity-oriented mindset. And so that was largely what initiated this priority focus for Beth. And so that people, there's some prereqs that you have to demonstrate, not just like I have X number of years of experience, but I come with this like mindset and understanding that aligns with our district beliefs and values. But that's work that's still under development.
Okay, well, that's really helpful if that's a frame. That's and I just have to put a plug in that Beth Lenovich was one of my child's favorite teachers ever. So, I knew she was in that role, but I thought she was actually doing the mentoring, but that's wonderful that she's, she
mentors the mentors.
Yes. Yes. So anyway,
logistics. Yeah.
Love her. One of our favorites. So, so thank you. I didn't have an understanding of that process. So that's helpful. I think that's all I had for questions. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you, Malia, and thank you, everybody. Amazing team, amazing work, body of work. I'm so impressed, and I'm learning a lot of great stuff here. One slide that I didn't fully understand was when you talk about the buckets of excellence and the district-wide strategy around advancing promises. Can you a little bit? What is the difference between?
Yes. Yeah. Great question. So when I was talking about that, I'm just pulling it up so I have it in front of me. So I kind of started by talking about the work that we're focused on. So like strengthening our core instruction, really strengthening our behavioral health continuum. So I was kind of describing, so that's the stuff that we're focused on. And then I was trying to explain how we go about moving those priorities forward. And so it's about our approach to kind of system-wide leadership and management. So my point, Yusuf, was we used to not really our previous comprehensive plan, we talk about it was a 91-page document and people really didn't know it. Nobody internalized it. And so when we did the Portland Promise, we wanted to shift toward having a district-wide vision and a set of shared goals that we were trying to pursue together. And so that was a new approach in the district, at least in recent history, because it was that every school is kind of doing their own thing. And so a lot of times people talked about, I said, pockets of excellence, because there's a great thing going over there at Casco, and, and Presumpscot has this cool thing happening, but it wasn't, if you're a student in the system, your experience is totally dependent, not just on which school you're at, but which teacher you happen to get. Because it was kind of everyone's doing their own thing, and some of it's really amazing. And we weren't really learning from that excellence. There was nobody whose job it was to have, we talk about on the academic team, the bird's eye view, to see across all the schools, to understand what's working, and to say, that thing's working, let's lift it up. And then how do you get other people to learn from it? That's a whole body of coordinating work that we have to do. So that's what I was kind of trying to explain is that approach to like the work that we do is kind of trying to spread that kind of excellence across the system and trying to help support those focused priorities that we all share no matter what school you're in. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much. One more question. Students experience homelessness. What are the number and what are the criteria? Do they have to be in shelter or?
Do you want to take that, Chris? Or do you want me to?
No, they don't have to be in the shelter. It's a student who is, there's several criteria. So you could be doubled up. You could be living at the shelter. You could be living in all sorts of, situations. But the kids that qualify and the families that qualify for McKinney-Vento are students who have experienced homelessness in the past year. So, a big part of this work is if a student has experienced homelessness, but then found housing, how do we support their ongoing education where they were going to school when they were homeless, and now that they're living in a different neighborhood, perhaps, or would be going to a different school? But we have to figure out how to support that if that's what the student and family think is most appropriate. So it's really complicated. Yeah, I'm not sure Yusuf, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mel.
And I'll just quickly chime in. I think we usually have, and Chris or Gail would be able to speak to this, about 250 students experiencing homelessness at any given time. So I think that was part of your question as well. Emily, did you have your hand up in the virtual room?
Yeah, I have a quick question about curriculum. So I understand the work being done in the district to kind of like adjust curriculum and the idea of like decolonizing the type of like curriculum that we have. And it's also like a really hot topic for students, especially at Deering. Like this is something that every student government kind of brings up every year, that they want to like change the curriculum. But like it doesn't usually happen from like right from the students, because I think there's a little bit of a misconception of like how fast we can get it done, like just through like a quick email. Like it doesn't really work like that. But I was wondering the accessibility of like the curriculum department for students, and if you guys are able to take like student voice, or like what role that has to have, because I know there are a lot of logistics. Like it's not just our district, like we have certain regulations that we follow from like the Maine Department of Education, and we can't like do everything on our own. But I was just wondering like what lines were there.
That's an amazing question, Emily. Thank you for asking it. Barrett, I'm looking at you and Jesse, Barrett too, because we actually worked with an intern, if you can speak about the work with the woman from Bowdoin that we worked with to create the student advisory team, which was going to launch this year, Emily, and didn't. But either Jesse or Barrett, if you want to speak to that, that would be great, because it's responsive to Emily. We've heard that feedback and definitely heard that urgency, like, hello, when is this happening? So will one of you speak to that?
Yeah, so a former student got connected to us and worked with me as an intern over the summer virtually, and really scaffolded out a plan for a student academic advisory committee, and how we would be able to kind of launch and scale that over time. I would just say, but in the interim, I feel like there are some entry points where we've been able to better involve students. So there's students on the social studies content team. There's students as part of the equity policy work group that's happening. And, so even in our very challenging circumstance of right now, we've still been able to, kind of engage students in that, in some of the curriculum work in those ways.
And I would just add something about the urgency piece, which we totally hear, and we hear that feedback a lot. One of the pieces of feedback we got from the Wabanaki leadership from at the state level is that, a lot of people have tried to do Wabanaki studies, but without sort of Indigenous input and partnership, and it didn't stick. It wasn't very effective, and that they really appreciate, and they notice that we are including, or actually really looking to them for input, and that just takes a lot of time to do it right, I think. And so a lot of people are saying, come on, let's do it now, and that work just takes time and a lot of coordination and a lot of I think you understand that, Emily, but just wanted to talk about that particular example.
Yeah, I think that helps a lot. The main point that I was making was not that I think I was blaming the board for like not being super urgent with it, but the idea that like I guess a lot of students feel that they want to get involved, but they don't really know how, and that it might not seem super accessible to the students themselves. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's great feedback, Emily. I think that's true. So I think, we have these examples, but I'm not sure other students know about those students. And so I definitely think that you're correct, and it's definitely a point of reflection for us. So that's a great point. Any other questions? I know, Jeff, you joined late, so I'm not sure when you got here, but just wanted to give you space if there's anything.
No, and I apologize for being late. I missed the first hours. Do we know, Javier, if this is being recorded?
Yes, it is being recorded. We'll share out the link.
All right, thank you.
Great. So I know I'm sensitive to the fact that others are going to be sharing some updates, so we should probably wrap up, but we'll make sure you have the PowerPoint, which gives you all those details, and we're definitely accessible and open for follow-up questions if you have them. But this is just setting the table, creating, as we say as educators, a schema, so that when we come back and talk about priorities and things with you all, you have a little bit more of that kind of context for the work, the team, and what we're trying to accomplish here. So appreciate you, and shout out to the team. People put a lot of time and work into this for you guys. So thanks to everyone for prepping and for being present tonight.
Thanks, Malia, and thank you to the team. Appreciate the hard work.
Bye, y'all. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, we are going to move seamlessly into the Portland Adult Education presentation. So, Anita, you are here, and I saw Liz is here as well. So I'm assuming you guys have your sequence worked out, and let's roll.
We do indeed. Thank you. Okay, I'm Anita St. Ange, director at Portland Adult Ed. One of the things we like to refer to PAE as the best hidden secret in Portland. There's a lot of work going on there, and I know as someone who is newer to there, I've only been there a little under 5 years, I never had a clue what was going on. So hopefully we'll give you a little bit of context. If you can move to the next slide. So PAE is part of a broader system of Maine adult education programs. There are 78 adult ed programs around the state in FY19, working with 13,500 and producing about a little over 1,000 high school credentials each year. Next slide. This, I think, is a great example. You may have seen this pipeline. It's part of what Educate Maine does to talk about the pipeline of children through the education system. However, the Educate Maine pipeline does not include that bottom layer. And that bottom layer is us. So if someone were going through the pipeline seamlessly, they would enter at pre-K and then exit at employment, going seamlessly through. But the reality is we know there are many, many people who don't do that. And there are leaks in the pipe, and adult ed programs pick up those leaks. And so one of the great things about adult education is that we have the ability, and our staff has the talent, to take adult students wherever they may be, to meet them where they are, help them with what they're doing, and then help them to get to where they want to be. And sometimes that takes years, and sometimes it takes several different attempts. But we are able to do that. We are able to say, okay, you need this right now, we'll give you this. And then you may need to go to work because you have a family that needs you to be working. But then ultimately you can come back again. And maybe that's in a year, maybe it's in 6 months, and we'll help you again. But that is one of the great things about adult education generally. Next slide. So we're also part of the Cumberland County Hub, which is 10 adult ed programs in Cumberland County. And we all work together to try to serve the needs of students throughout the county. PAE serves as fiscal agent for the Hub for 2 federal grants and 1 private grant. Next slide. And as you can see, we are the largest program in Maine. I tried to give you a little bit of context for sort of what we're doing now, what we did last year, but also before the pandemic. We always talked about having around 4,000 students at Portland Adult Ed. And half of those students are, actually more than half, are academic and workforce students. And then the other half are community life enrichment students. So in our academic program, which we're housed over at the Kavanaugh School, we rent our building from the diocese, and we have more than 16 classrooms. We have 5 different time sequences. So we have classes from 8 in the morning through the afternoon and to 8 p.m. And students will come either on Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday. In any given day, we'll have over 1,000 students in and out of our building when we're actually in the building. And our community life classes are held primarily in the evening throughout the city. In all of our schools, we'll have language classes, exercise classes, art classes, other kinds of things. And that program has taken the biggest hit as a result of the pandemic, because we've done a few virtual classes, but so much of that work was done face-to-face. Next slide. So this tells you a little bit about our staffing. One of the things to point out is I want to focus on the teachers. So you'll see we have 17 salaried teachers with an approximate FTE of 14.25. And again, think about the 2,000 students who are being served by that group. And then if you look down at the bottom, we have 81 hourly teachers. And they are the ones I'd say about a third of those are doing community life. But in almost all of our programs, the ratio of salaried contracted teachers to hourly teachers is at least, 1/3 salaried to 2/3 hourly. And the hourly salaried dynamic works well. We have a lot of retired teachers who want to teach a class or a couple of classes. They are excellent teachers. But our contracted teachers are the ones who end up providing some of the leadership, some of the planning, a lot of the backbone of our, particularly our ESOL department, which is the largest department that we have. And ESOL is English for speakers of other languages. What we'd love to be able to do is to move that ratio a little bit so that we would have maybe even closer to half and half, to allow for a little more stability and a little more leadership on the part of our salaried staff. And we've been gradually creeping up. And I will say this current administration has been incredibly supportive of adult education, and we acknowledge that and appreciate it. One of the things you'll see, we have a half-time social worker. Susan was added last year. She is half with PAE and the other half McKinney-vento that we talked about before. And that has made a huge difference. She serves as a resource to our teachers and also to our students. So those are our investments that we've made recently in order to meet the needs of our students. Next slide. Our funding sources. So you can see here about half of our funding comes from the local budget, and then the other half is grant funded. We have grants from the state, including a subsidy, federal grants, and a significant portion of our private grants that we have. Next slide. Oh, actually, can you go back for a minute? Because I didn't say our total budget is, you can see at the top, $3,427,582. Okay, now next slide. And as I'm sure is the same at every school, the vast majority of our budget goes to salaries and benefits. For our local funding, it's 79% for salaries. And then we have a higher for general and administrative, our rent, our utilities, our internet, those kinds of things. For our grant funding, even more goes directly to salaries and benefits, additional to books and instructional materials, some professional development and purchase services, and a small amount to general administrative. Next category. So right now I'm going to focus on the academic and the workforce areas, and we're going to talk about 4 different areas. So the high school diploma classes and HiSET, college transitions, English language, and then workforce. Next slide. So currently, we have 154 students enrolled in high school diploma and HiSET. HiSET, for those of you who don't know, is what was formerly called GED. Last year, we had 86 students who got a high school credential. That was a little lower than normal. Normally, we have about 100 each year. One of the things that I did want to talk a little bit about is the Street Academy, especially we were talking about McKinney-vento earlier. So we have something called the Street Academy, and we have two teachers who have worked for the Portland Public Schools for many, many years and work full-time at the teen center, working with homeless youth. And they do a number of things. They support homeless youth who are in the shelter, who are actually in high schools. And then they also work with youth and young adults who are looking to either do credit recovery so that they can get their high school diploma, or they may work on HiSET preparation so that they can get their equivalency. They also have a Learn to Earn program where they're doing employability skills and working with employers to create internships. That was going on for the younger students for a number of years, and we just got a grant from United Way to allow for additional stipends for the 18 to 24-year-olds. In 1920, Street Academy served 107 students. And then this past year, from September to February, again, mostly remote, they've served 91 students through that program. Next slide. Another important program that we have is called College Transitions. And this is really working with students who are ready or nearly ready to go to college. And this is the kind of work a lot of our students are foreign-born professionals or just foreign-born students and English language learners. So there is a lot of work around the transition. And a number of our asylum-seeking students are not eligible for traditional programs. One of the programs that is available to them is the Rockefeller, now the Adult Learner Scholarship. And we have been very fortunate that nearly 70 people have gotten this Rockefeller Scholarship since 2014, and that's $1,000 to $5,000 per student. One of the things we track is how well our students are doing primarily at SMCC. A lot of our students go directly from PAE to there. And we had 20 former college transition students on the spring 2020 Dean's List and 17 on the fall 2020 Dean's List. One of those was a young man named Mike Masudi. He was on the fall 2020 Dean's List, and we wanted to share his story. If you could, whoops, click on that. There we go.
I never felt like I was smart enough, to be honest. When I came from Africa, I never felt confident. But when I came here, I had people believing in me, not knowing where I was from. You know, just when you have such people just telling you that you're smart, you can do it, I believe you're strong enough to do it, that meant a lot to me, you know. Being part of a community means acceptance. I've been accepted in this community and I've never faced a boundary. That's why I've been able to go to school. I've been able to volunteer. I've been able to do everything. So it's a great feeling. It's a great feeling to be part of a community. The staff, everyone is great here, you know, from whatever place you come. They accept you the way you are. They help you through every step to achieve your goals. I'm actually proud of being an adult student. Because we talk about high school and then here we talk about adult. You know, that's two different things. What does the word adult mean to me? Well, it means being mature, you know, coming to understanding that you have to take charge if you want to achieve something because you're mature enough to go on your own. college transitions program. That's one thing that changed my life. I'm not a native speaker. English is my second language, so I didn't feel confident enough. Going to college means being confident in all the areas, speaking, writing, and listening. I'm more confident now in writing. I'm more confident with mathematics, and I feel like I'm prepared to go to college. I'm excited about college because I believe that will be a big piece of my life, and it will give me a new direction, and probably will change what I am today into somebody better. Yeah. So I'd just like to be a better version of myself, and I believe that education has something to do with that. My name is Mike. This is what adult education looks like.
Thanks. If you go to our website, you will see more of those. So Mike is about to graduate from SMCC, and he's going to be transferring to UMA. Next slide. It's a little hard to see, but this is our immigrant enrollment chart. And we do this every year. It's always very interesting to see where our students are coming from. And this was the 2018-19 school year. We had 2,420 students representing 90 different countries. And you can see the largest groups were from Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo. That bar changes year to year, but that is, and these are primarily asylum seekers who are here coming as new arrivals to Portland at this time. Next slide. As I said before, our ESOL classes is our largest department. And I just showed you a couple of different to see, sort of what we were doing pre-pandemic and then now. We actually have kept most of our students. We definitely lost people, but we'll talk a little bit about COVID later on. But on average, we have, anywhere from, you can see here 619 this year, 589 last year. Some years we have 700 to 800 new students who arrive every year. And then some who return and, some who are with us for a long period of time. In our ESOL department, in the building, we had an average class size of 30. And because of the difficulty with remote learning, we've tried to cut class sizes down to 20. Although we do, and we also have a very robust learning lab so that we offer services to everyone. There's a waiting list to get into classes, although right now it's not terribly long. And everyone who is on the waiting list is offered an opportunity to work on their skills at the lab and right now remotely. And so I am now going to turn this over to Liz.
Thank you, Anita. Next slide, please. So in addition to the academic and ESOL programs Anita described, we offer a growing range of workforce development opportunities for our students. So first, we offer foundational training, such as digital literacy or work readiness. Some example classes would be a basic computer skills class, to Excel, to workplace communication or job search strategies. And an area of growth for us, next slide, please. An area of growth for us over the last couple of years has been in sector-specific workforce training. These are programs that were developed in partnership with employers and area workforce agencies in in-demand industries. Sectors include healthcare, education, finance, transportation, and early childhood. And to give a couple examples, here in this photo, we have the graduates of our English Language Learner CNA class that's in partnership with New England Rehab and the Barron Center. We also, another example would be our Education Academy, which is focused on foreign-trained educators who aspire to become ed techs and then certified teachers in Maine. And Portland Public Schools has been a key partner in that initiative. For one final example is our New Mainer Teller Training Program. So this was designed and launched 1 year ago, last January, in partnership with 6 financial institutions, credit unions, and local banks. They helped us design the program as well as co-teach the class with our adult ed instructors. It was a 12-week class, 20 hours a week. And I'm proud to say that of the 14 graduates, 10 secured new employment, and of those, 7 are now working as tellers in local credit unions and banks, from Seaport Credit Union to Bangor Savings to Bath Savings to Infinity. So we are so proud of this program and excited to share that we just launched our 2nd cohort in January. We now have 8 financial institutions involved. Next slide, please. So another workforce-related program at Portland Adult Ed is our New Mainers Resource Center. It was founded in 2013 by the legislature. It's a fully grant-funded program, and its focus is on foreign-trained professionals who aspire to re-enter their field and fulfill their potential in Maine. So services include credential evaluation and licensing support, intensive career advising. Our coordinator, Sally Sutton, is a big proponent of research and advocacy. And you'll see at the end of this PowerPoint, we have links to several of her reports, as well as navigating the U.S. labor market, building employer relationships to connect skilled professionals with job opportunities, and links to additional training. Next slide, please. So here's a snapshot of the students served. And last year in 2019 and 20, we served 306 participants that received career advising. Of those, 76% had an undergraduate degree or above. And you can see more detail in the pie chart. Next slide, please. Now, Anita will share a couple stories of NMRC students. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And before I do that, I do want to say, Liz came to us with a significant background in workforce development, and it has made a very big difference. Couple things that I would note: in the last couple of years, we were recognized as a collaborative partner by New England Rehab, and we were given an award by the Greater Portland Chamber of Commerce. And I think a lot of that recognition is the result of the collaboration with employers and our workforce development work that we've been doing. So, talk a little bit about Claude and Jolie, who came to Portland Adult Ed in 2015. Claude, in particular, when he came, Sally says that she needed an interpreter to speak with him. His English level was such that he needed an interpreter to communicate. He came as an electrical engineer, and she was a nurse. They both took classes at PAE, and just to demonstrate their level of commitment, before getting a bus pass, he would walk to PAE from Westbrook to take his classes. They both took classes, had evaluations of their degrees, received guidance about their career path, and he was able to find work in his field, currently working from home with K&A Engineering Consulting as a testing and commissioning engineer. She took our ELL CNA class and is now working as a CNA and exploring a different healthcare career while waiting for their young children to get into school. They bought a home, and they're successfully working in the field. Sally called Claude to tell him that we would be talking about him tonight, and he mentioned that he wants to go for his master's degree in electrical engineering at UMO and wants help preparing for his TOEFL test. Which is exactly the kind of thing, we were talking earlier. He came early, focused on language, then after a period of time, focused on career development. And now, he's been doing that for a while, came back for additional help to get to the next level. And that's the kind of thing that happens at Adult Ed. So that is our story. Next slide, please. Oh, I almost forgot COVID. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but I did want to say what happened in March, because of the nature of our school and the nature of our students. We went totally remote. And one of the things that happened was we had students trying to take classes on their flip phones. We had people who were communicating with their teachers through WhatsApp. We had one teacher who would copy tests or class materials and send it to her students in the mail. Students were doing homework and taking pictures and emailing them to their teachers. So one of the things, we were able to get some hotspots from the district, and we were able to do some fundraising to purchase some Chromebooks. We were able to continue to do even more fundraising and ordered a lot of Chromebooks that we've been waiting for since July. And we keep saying at the end of the month. Right now, it's looking like the end of February. But we have been able to get a lot of students onboarded and teaching people how to use Zoom. And we spent a lot of time with our staff doing professional development around how to teach remotely, because we went from, we'll never do distance learning, to now that's all we are doing. And one of the things that's interesting is that we have learned that for some of our students, distance learning is the best thing that could have happened. And so I expect that we're going to continue to have a more robust distance learning curriculum as we go forward. So next slide. And that is the end. And thank you very much for listening to us. And we'll take any questions if you want, if we have time.
Any questions for Anita or Liz? And I also will note that Sally is over in the participants. So if she needs to slide over here, we can also promote her to answer any questions.
And she's going to be at your March board meeting to talk about the Ed Academy as well.
I do have one question. Thank you, Anita and Liz. About the evaluation. If someone comes here with, let's say, a degree from another country, is it evaluating and telling them how many classes they have to take to receive their bachelor or their master degree, and how does that work?
Yes, and I see Sally just joined. Do you want to jump in on that, Sally?
Sure, thank you. So part of what we do through New Mainers Resource Center, we work with people, as you mentioned, if they have a degree from another country, to figure out when and how it should be evaluated. It's a fairly complicated process because you need to know who's going to use that evaluation when it's done. Because if you're an engineer, there might be one way they want to have it evaluated. If you're a doctor, they might want it to be another way. So you have to know who the school is or who the employer or the licensing group is to have it done. And we spent some time in trying to make sure we understand that. But also many people don't have the resources that it takes to pay for that, which could cost, sometimes it involves both the translation and the evaluation, and that could get up to close to $1,000 or more for both of those. So we've also been trying to find resources to help cover those costs for people.
And we've been very successful. Sally has largely been the one, but in getting grant funding. So we have been able to fund people's credential translation and evaluation.
Thank you so much. And I just want to mention how important is that part. And thank you for doing that. It takes a lot of effort, experience that kind of evaluation in another state. And it took a lot of time to reach out the Department of Education of the country that they get the degree from, translating, credential, all of these things, and then seeking recognition from the local and national universities. So it's a lot of work, and thank you so much. Yeah.
If I could just add one other thing to that. One of the things we're trying to do, besides just helping individuals, we're working with the licensing boards at the state. We're working with USM and other schools and trying to impress on them the need for those entities to be flexible about how an evaluation can be done. For many of the people that we see, they were smart and they brought their transcripts and diplomas with them, or maybe they have copies of them. And so if the school or employer can use those documents rather than relying on something coming from a person's school, it makes it so much easier to have it done. So people are paying attention to the need for that, and hopefully we'll be able to make some change and make it easier for people to have it done, so you won't have to have gone through what you had to.
And I would note, I mean, Liz mentioned earlier at the end of the slideshow, there are a couple of reports that Sally and her team have worked on that I think you would find interesting, that are basically recommendations for the broader policymakers around those areas.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a just short comment and brief question. Thank you, Anita, so much for sharing all that. I had the pleasure, like a couple of years ago, to be able, also didn't know almost anything about PAE, and then did some tutoring with a student, and I just the energy in that building and positivity, and you know, just hearing the young man who spoke, like that was just my feeling of like hope, and I was just so moved by just observing what was going on in there. So I just want to put a plug at some point when we're back in more normal times I would love for the board to be able to come and have a tour. And, you know, I'm sure the not new members maybe have been in the space, but I just would love to be able to have that, you know, kind of more context and understanding. And also just wanted to just really thank, I loved how you explained that kind of, I was thinking it was like an open door policy. Like, I just love that, you know, because obviously our pre-K to 12 is not set up that way. I mean, there are ways where we try to get students to be able to complete their degrees, but I just love that model is just really powerful to me, that, you know, students can kind of come in and out and come back again when they're at another stage. So I just wanted to, like, just having that really explained, like, was wonderful and made me kind of understand more what the powerful work that's done there is. My quick question was just about the learning lab, because you had mentioned that, and then you talked about being all remote at the end, which was helpful because I wasn't quite clear about the remote piece. But is the learning lab not also, is that not in person at all at this point?
No, it's remote.
Okay.
But we are able to, you know, get people. Well, we do have in-person onboarding. So, you know, either somebody might bring their own device, or again, we are now currently loaning devices and hotspots to students and explaining how to use different programs. But our staff has been incredibly successful doing student advising and coaching and all of those things remotely. I mean, it really has been amazing.
Yeah, so the Learning Lab, that still is a resource, but it isn't in person, but you figured out how to
correct
that work. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
And let me just add to your point about being, you know, looking forward to being on site. You should also look forward to looking at their remote work. I had the opportunity last week, I think it was, to spend, you know, a couple of minutes in one of their remote classes, and Leanna Welk, who's one of their instructors, has just done a fabulous job of creating community with with students in a remote setting. So I was incredibly impressed with that, and I don't want to offer up her class, but I know that there are a lot of people at Portland Adult Ed that would love to see board members understand the work that they're doing and would probably be open to that. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that we often do is invite board members to come in and listen to presentations. And I know for a fact that Shoshana Who's ESOL 5 class is doing some presentations. So I was thinking that I would invite you all to come to some of those. So stay tuned.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Anita and her team? No? Okay, then we are rounding the last turn, and this will be officially your last orientation as a new board member. And it's a doozy because we are going to be talking about everything that the finance department does, which is obviously a ton. And in addition to that, Kathy's going to walk us through an orientation to the budget process, which I think for all of you will be helpful. You'll have many other opportunities along the way. We have a big finance committee meeting tomorrow that is going to be sort of the continuation of this, because it will get into some of the details around how things are shaping up for FY22. But with that, I will ask Kathy to, Kathy, does Anne have your presentation, or how are we doing this?
Kathy, you're welcome to screen share. You're welcome to send it my way.
I think I'll try to screen share, Ian.
Perfect. You're all set up to do that.
Let me just... Oops, and I have it on the wrong slide, so let me go back here. Sorry. There we go. Okay. So good evening to everybody. I'm Kathy Winchenbach. I'm very happy to be here. I'm into my third week here. So I just wanted to mention up front that I may need to research and get back to you on any specific questions you might have, but I'll try my best to answer them tonight. So please feel free to ask questions as we move along, because we'll get into a little bit of detail that may be best to ask while we're there. So the finance team, our team is myself. We have a payroll manager. We have 2 payroll clerks. We have a senior budget and financial systems analyst. We have a budget and accounting manager, a controller position, accounting specialist, and financial analyst. So we have 9 FTEs that make up the finance office. What we do is, well, we're currently in the budget development process, and that's where I've concentrated most of my efforts since my arrival. So most of this presentation will be related to the budget, just to give you a little bit of an introduction into some of the terminology and some of the reports that we might be looking at. But we also, and as importantly, account for all district revenues and expenditures. We do payroll processing, management and reporting. We work closely with our HR department. We pay all the bills. We manage the billing and receipt of funds. We prepare year-end audit schedules and account reconciliations. And we're also really responsible for maintaining internal financial controls over all of these transactions to ensure proper stewardship of assets. So this slide shows the finance budget. And as you'll see in most areas, the personnel costs represent the majority of our budget. So I wanted to go over some of the budget development basics. We have an internal process for budget development, and we work on 2 basic components of the budget. So we started with the personnel, which is the salary and benefits budget. And then we have a non-salary and benefits budget, which includes all items that aren't included in the personnel budget. And it's really a collaborative effort with the school and department heads. And the school and the department heads enter their requests related to their non-salary and benefits into our budget management tool, which is in Munis, which is our accounting software. And then school and department heads submit proposals in the form of district-wide investments and classroom initiatives for strategic discussion. So this year, we'll need to decide the amount of federal grant funding to use, as well as discussing any future implications, which is kind of a little added layer of complexity. So the finance team projects the revenue sources, and really the primary revenue component used to project the amount of local property tax funding that will be needed to fund the school budget is the state share, and that is referred to as our EPS funding. So EPS refers to essential programs and services. It's also referred to as the state funding formula, the state subsidy, general purpose aid, GPA. It's all the same thing. The ED 279 report is a report from the Maine Department of Education that shows the process steps and the detailed calculations that the state of Maine uses to determine the state and local share of subsidy. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the EPS formula, because there's a lot of discussion around that, and we usually use this as our starting point to know how much state aid or state subsidy we're expecting to have, and then we build the budget around that. So the EPS funding formula, this is from the state website. The funding formula is really designed to ensure that all schools have the programs and resources that are essential for all students to have an equitable opportunity to achieve Maine's learning results. And the EPS model provides a basis for adequacy and greater equity in the funding of pre-K through 12 education, because it's cost-driven rather than expenditure-driven. So while we report our expenditures to the state, they have come up with a calculation that determines what they believe the cost of a quality education should be. And they use that in the determination of what their portion of the allocation will be. And the model is really designed to respond to students' needs. It's based on years of research and information that's gleaned from high-performing, cost-effective school units. As the EPS relates to Portland Public Schools, we're really faced with declining school funding from the state over the next several years due to our rapidly rising property tax valuation, among other factors. And the state expects cities and towns with the higher property tax valuations, such as Portland, to pay a larger share of the cost of education in their communities. And the city council ultimately determines the amount of the property tax revenue that's allocated to the school budget. So this next schedule has a lot of information on it, but I really wanted you to just see that we're really looking at the funding categories of the ED 279 report. This isn't the report itself, which is quite lengthy, but these are just the general categories that are, I'm just comparing it. This is the latest one. Actually, some of these numbers continue to change throughout the school year. But as of January, we've received the FY22, and I'm just comparing the allocations and the local and state shares to last year. And you can see here, I think the primary purpose of this slide was just to show some of the categories that come up to the operating allocation, which is the basis for the calculation. So I guess I just wanted to point out on this slide, and we'll go into a little bit more detail. Sorry, that keeps showing up there. That we actually lost close to $1 million in our state subsidy for FY22. So in this slide, I just wanted to talk about the key drivers of the operating allocation. So the operating allocation is really what we're using here to determine, maybe I should start with the local contribution. The local contribution is based on the state property tax valuation and the state mill rate. And the state mill rate is the mill rate that they determine. It's not the city of Portland's tax rate, but it's the state's mill rate that's applied uniformly statewide. And that's used to determine what the local share is going to be. And then the state share is the difference between the operating allocation, which is the 94,915,495 in the FY22 column. And that if we subtract the 77 million from the 94, almost 95 million, we come down to a $17 million adjusted state subsidy. And that's basically where it shows how much we're expected to receive from the state. So the key drivers of this operating allocation are really enrollment and demographics. We provide a lot of information to the state. They use all of this information into some calculations and formulas. It's quite complex, and my intent wasn't to go over all of that tonight, but just to kind of give you an overview that the key drivers of the operating allocation are enrollment and demographics, the personnel structure and characteristics. So in other words, the types, the positions that we have at Portland Public Schools and what our staff are comprised of, any prior year costs. And then, of course, they may have changes to the EPS formula from year to year. So that all comes into play in determining what our state subsidy amount's going to be. And also included in this is we have a state valuation that may change. So in the next slide, I wanted to show that if the state mill rate had not changed, had not been reduced, that we would have had to contribute even more for our local allocation, and the state subsidy would have been reduced by an even greater amount. So what I did here is I'm trying to show that this is the state valuation, and it's divided by 1,000 because we're multiplying this by a mill rate, which is based on 1,000, based on the valuation divided by 1,000. So it's $8.18 per $1,000 valuation. So if we took the FY22 valuation and we multiplied it by the FY21 rate, our local share would have been $79.7 million. And the state reduced the mill rate to $7.90. And therefore our local share was only $77 million. So the increase in our local contribution would have been $2.7 million more had the state not lowered its mill rate. So the total increase that would have been $5.4 million in our local allocation, and our total reduction in state subsidy would have been 3.6. So there are a lot of factors that impact the differences and the change in our state subsidy and local allocation.
And Kathy, can you say a little bit about why that mill rate went down?
I think the governor, I don't have all the details, but I think the governor really committed more funding to education. And I think that helped. If that hadn't happened, we'd be in a little bit worse shape. So I haven't done enough research on that to really answer that specifically.
I believe
that's why that happened.
Can I just interject for just a second, just based on that? And perhaps I missed it because there were a lot of numbers here.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, this is excellent. This is great stuff. I think it was on slide 9 where we talked about, so we're talking about projections. I know that the city of Portland had proposed a reassessment on property valuations that was put on hold because of COVID. Are these numbers reflective of what's going to be put? I think they're okay. I see you're shaking your head. So they're not.
They're not. That has not been implemented yet. So
I thought there was an intent to roll out. The last time I looked, and it may be subject to change, but within the next couple of months, that might So
I think within the next couple of months, but that's not reflected here because that valuation is not the valuation.
Hasn't been.
Yeah,
Okay.
and this is actually the.
This is the state valuation, not the city's. It's very confusing, but this is the valuation.
No, I get that. I get that, but that wouldn't that necessarily change some of.
And I guess the sort of the short answer to that, Jeff, and there really isn't a short answer, is that when that valuation at the city level rolls out, it won't change anything in terms of state funding. It will change the way that the taxes are distributed, the tax burden is distributed. So, many homes will see their taxes go up. Some homes will see their taxes go down. The mill rate in the city will go down because there's just a reassessment of property that has obviously increased in value substantially since the last time it was reassessed, which I think was in the year 2003. So, obviously properties have, increased significantly since then. So it doesn't change how much needs to be collected. It changes who it gets collected from. Does that?
No, I appreciate the insight, and I apologize for muddying the waters there.
No, not at all.
The waters, that is definitely going to be a big subject of discussion during the budget process, particularly with the city. So, we will be coming back to it. We'll have, more graphic illustrations of how those two different pieces work together.
And I really didn't want to get into too much detail to confuse some of the calculations here, but I did want to also, as I go forward, show you a little bit about how that impacts on the city side. But this is just the EPS formula, and there's a lot of discussion that's usually occurs around the EPS and the state share of the subsidy, or the state subsidy. So I wanted to just familiarize you, and you sound like you're already very familiar, and I apologize because I don't know really how familiar everyone is with each concept, but I just took it from the point that you are not as familiar as you may be.
Kathy, could I just ask a quick follow-up?
Of course.
To that about the mill rate, which I've had explained to me like multiple times. I feel like I need to do more to understand it, but this was really helpful about the lowering the mill rate. I'm just curious, is that something that's done every year? I don't know if Javier could, is that something we expect to see? Or no, this was a rare, okay.
I think this is pretty rare. I think it typically is expected and has gone up, but I don't believe I included a slide in there that does have that historical perspective in there.
Just for my general understanding.
In the last couple of years under Governor Mills, the mill rate has gone down, both of her budgets. So last year and this year it has gone down because she has dedicated more resources to it. The prior year, the mill rate shot up from where it is going to be this year to where it was, which was somewhere in the neighborhood of 8.38, the state mill rate. So I think that it is a reflection of an investment in education that has been, substantially higher than it had been in previous years. So even with those, the mill rate going down, as you see, we're still losing money because our valuation has grown as much as it has at the state level, independent of what the city's actual valuation is. I think the city is assuming an $85 million increase in its valuation as part of our budget planning. So that's already been, discussed with the city finance director, and that's incorporated into, what you will see tomorrow. But the mill rate at the state level has dropped in the last couple of years. But even with that, because our valuation from the state overall valuation has increased, And so even with the lowering of the mill rate, we've still lost money. So we're losing $1 million this year.
Okay, thank you. That helps me understand just even the separate mill rate and valuation here. And also I didn't understand, so the mill rate would be like during budget season at the state level. That's something yearly that changes. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a known, that's known. That's how we get our ED 279. It's basically the amount, the mill rate is just the amount of money that the multiplier that's needed to raise the amount of money that the state formula calls for, given the valuation in the state. So that's really what it amounts to.
And I think my next slide, what I was trying to show, was just that if the mill rate had stayed the same, what would we have lost in state subsidy? And we would have lost 3.6 million had it stayed at 818. So we're grateful that it went down. So then switching to Portland Public Schools budget, to just show you to start that the tax revenue to support the budget in FY21, and I'm really going to concentrate on mostly FY21 because we're still working on the FY22 budget and that hasn't been quite rolled out quite yet. But the FY21 budget, 79% of our tax revenue was property tax. And the property tax revenue is the amount of funding that's needed to balance the budget or fill the gap between budgeted expenditures and the non-property tax revenue. And that I'm going to show you on the next slide. So what this is showing for FY21 is there were two things I guess I wanted to really note on this one. And the first was that the personnel budget in total is really about 79-80% of the total expenditure budget. So these are the components of our FY21 expenditure budget, the year we're in currently. And then these are our revenue sources. And we needed 94 million in a tax levy to balance our budget. And that 94 million represents the 79% of the revenue budget on that slide. And then to determine the school portion of the tax rate, you take this property tax valuation and you divide it by the city valuation divided by 1,000 because it's this tax rate's per $1,000 of valuation. So really 94 million divided by 8,070,000 is 1169. And the total valuation for the city and school combined was 2331. And we're about 50% of the city tax, of the total tax rate for the city. And this shows a little bit about the historical the school side of the tax rate. And what I wanted to point out in this slide was that for 2021, the city held that tax rate flat. So we didn't have a tax increase this past year. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen for FY 2022. In this slide, 79% of the property taxes on that previous slide I was showing translated to this 94.3 million, which is about 50% of the city tax levy. So this was the total city tax levy, the 188 million, and we were 94 million, and the city was 93.7 million. and the city valuation was $8,070,000,000. And so the school tax rate was $11.69. The city's side was $11.62, and the combined, the tax rate that taxpayers are paying is $23.31 per $1,000 of assessed value on their property. And we know that the city valuation is expected to increase by $85 million for FY22. Harvey just mentioned that. So the city valuation is going from $8,070,000,000 to $8,155,000,000. And this slide shows that we can actually increase our school share by about $1 million. And because the city valuation went up, the tax rate does not. It can go up. The tax rate with this particular increase, the $85 million in valuation, we can actually increase our tax revenue by $1 million, and it won't impact the tax rate. But we're probably not going to just increase our tax revenue by $1 million. We may need more than that, but we'll be going through some calculations for that too, to show what the impact will be as we determine what this number needs to be to balance our budget for FY22. So this is actually showing the amount of a budget increase that the valuation increase would absorb. So if we went up $1 million in our budget, because the city valuation went up $85 million, it absorbed that, and we'd stay flat. So the considerations for the FY22 budget process are really the impact on the local property tax rate. We'll be talking a lot about that. We want to reiterate, or I would like us to reiterate, I don't know, I think there's been a lot of discussion around this, but we have quite a bit of federal funding. And if we use it to offset school expenditures in FY22 and 23, we may need to come back. That money may need to come back into the FY24 local budget at some point, especially if we want or need to sustain the programming or the initiatives that were started during the pandemic. So it's just something to keep in mind. We do have a fair amount of federal funding that we can use. There are some guidelines around that, of course, but the more we use the federal funding for, then if we need to refund those things through the local budget, the local operating budget, will need to add them back in FY24. And we want to be cautious of that. And we also want to continue careful spending according to the federal guidelines to avoid any audit findings that may require payback of federal funds. So we want to make sure that we're meeting all the guidelines for that federal funding as well. So there are just some key dates here for our budget timeline. I know you all have the budget schedule, and there are many dates on that. We'll have many meetings, but primarily March 16th is what we're working toward for the FY22 budget presentation. And April 13th, the school board votes on the budget. May 17th, the city council votes. And then June 8th, we have our public vote. And that really concludes the presentation. I hope I didn't confuse everyone.
Oh, they will have many opportunities. They're confused over the next few months.
Okay.
And I will say this, half tongue in cheek. This is probably the most important work that you do as an entity, as a school board, is to set the budget, because it gives us the resources to do the work that we do. So it is by far the most important, the most important task for the board. It's also the most politically fraught difficult every year, and it's super complicated to boot. It is not something that, is just like, oh, it's easy. You just raise it or lower it or something along. There's all of these. There's the state aspects of it. There's the local aspects of it. There's, there's just a lot of, different components at work. So be patient with yourselves, be patient with us, and, we will get through the budget. This will be my fifth, and it's nothing that I ever look forward to, but a very, very important part of my role as well. Ms. Chung.
Thank you for preparing this presentation. I was sort of confused through a lot of it, but I look forward to understanding it more. So what I wanted to ask about was how cuts are made. And when you have a fluctuating budget like this, and where millions, like it can change by millions every year, where do the cuts happen? Like, is everything decreased by like 0.2%, or is there a certain area where we cut from?
The latter. Mostly, it's very difficult to just do across the board. We're going to reduce by this much. As you saw, 80% of the budget goes to salaries and benefits for staff. So to do that would mean that people would have to, uniformly say, like, yes, I'm okay with, receiving, a 10% cut on my, on my salary, if that's how much you were, having to cut, or a 3% cut on my salary. Most of our employees are unionized and have a contract that, obligates the board to, to meet those contract requirements. So you have to go elsewhere to make the cuts. And that's when, we get into the conversations that, you probably remember, hearing, at least in some ways over the last couple of years, about, maybe reducing the number of high schools, or reducing the number of elementary schools, or, having fewer sports, or having this, those are the kinds of decisions. Last year, for example, we eliminated elementary Spanish. That was a significant cut that was made, at the same time that we were implementing other programs. But, in order to be able to pay for those programs, we made those reductions. So it's usually at the program level where those cuts are made, as opposed to, across the board, everything gets reduced by 2%.
And a follow-up question on that: who brings up those programs? Like, is that something board members are just like everyone brings a program that they think should be cut from the district? Or how does that
That's not the ideal way for it to happen. It really should be the administration, the superintendent bringing those, and the board approving them. But that never happens. So it does turn out to be more of a, well, I don't think that we should do that. So it is, that's part of the complexity of the budget process is, you have to get consensus among board members around what are the things that we are looking to invest in, and what are the sacrifices we're willing to make to be able to invest in those things. And, it's always, this is like a truism, is, nothing is easy to cut. Everything has a constituency. Some are harder than others, but, nothing is ever easy. It's never, I have never in my whole career brought something to the board and said, like, let's cut this. And everybody goes like, yeah, let's do that. So that's never happens. There's always going to be, somebody who makes a good case for, for maintaining something. So it's a very, it's, emotionally taxing, as well as just difficult time of the year.
That helps a lot. Thank you.
Good question, Emily.
Very good question.
I'll keep this really brief. I don't think Emily's ever asked a bad question.
Probably not.
You're an insightful insightful student. And Kathy, I thought your presentation was great. I have some questions, but I'll reserve them for maybe tomorrow night, where it's a little bit more in depth. So I just want to thank you for taking the time. I know it's 8:30 and it's getting late, but thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Youssef, any questions you may have?
No. One of the questions I asked in the budget committee last time, it was the state valuation, and has been cleared out now today. So yes, thank you so much, Kathy. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, thank you, Kathy. This was your maiden voyage. There will be many more of these to come in the next month. So, and many more after that as well. So, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And as I said earlier, this was the last of the orientation presentations. I hope that this has helped to fill out or begin to form the basis of your understanding of everything that we do as a district and all of the work that our different departments do to, continue to move the operation forward. And, again, obviously, Emily asked some great questions. You all asked great questions. These are all new things. And, the way that you build your understanding is over time and by asking those questions. So don't ever be shy about doing that. That's what we're here to do, is to help to build that understanding so that you can do your job and help us to do ours. So thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for the time that you've dedicated to this. And I hope it's, helpful in by the time that your term is up, that you will be like, I totally get this stuff, and so I'm going to run for another term, because now that I got it, I don't want to let it go to waste. So.
Thank you to all of your committed staff for their time over the last several. I know we've said it, but I hope everybody takes to heart that we appreciate all the evening time that's put into it. I know it's a lot, so thank you.
Likewise. So.
Well, the timing was great, because I learned a lot too, because I'm new too. So I thought it was very beneficial. A lot of information, but yeah.
And Lindsay, you're also taking this all in, and building your knowledge base. So we appreciate that. And so great. All right. Hope everybody has a great evening.